I'm Matt McClure, and this is Currents. As same-sex couples get ready to say "I do" in New York, some clerks say "I don't" to issuing them marriage licenses. Plus, just what is marriage anyway? Some young New Yorkers find out what church teaching has to say.
It's not just a question of how marriage should be defined. It's not about the definition of a word. It's not about semantics. It's about the fundamental institution of society.
And as the British phone hacking scandal crosses the pond, Rupert Murdoch feels the pressure and a pie in his face. Good evening, and thanks so much for joining us tonight. Well, it is no eagerly anticipated summer movie blockbuster, but it is leading up to an epic clash of the Clerks versus Cuomo, as New York stands just 4 days away from celebrating same-sex nuptials. Now, some local clerks have resigned or are refusing to perform these marriages rather than go against their religious beliefs. It all began last week with the resignation of Barker Town Clerk Laura Fatuski. Now, she cited her faith in refusing to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples. Two other clerks have since joined her, including the Roman Catholic Town Clerk of Guilderland, who resigned as the town's marriage officer, citing that her belief that marriage should be between a man and a woman. Well, joining me now on the phone is a third town clerk to resign in opposition to same-sex marriage based on her religious convictions. She is Granby Town Clerk Ruth Sheldon. Sheldon officially leaves office on July 23rd. That's exactly 1 day before New York's same-sex marriage law takes effect. Ruth, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
Well, we really appreciate your time. Now, you've served the people of Granby there for a few years, I understand. Was making this decision to resign, was that a difficult one for you to make?
In some ways, yes, it was. I served here for 15 and a half years, and I've gotten to know and enjoy working here and serving the people of the town of Granby. So it wasn't easy, but yet I felt it was what I needed to do.
Sure. And what was it in the end that helped you reach that decision? What was it that convinced you that it was the right thing to do?
Well, I prayed about it extensively, and I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman. I believe the Bible teaches that very clearly, but I had to stand by what I believed.
Sure. Well,
and in order to stand by what I believed, I had to submit my resignation.
Sure. Tell us a little bit about any feedback that you've received from the public. Have people been supportive? Have they been critical of this decision?
I have had so much support from people that I know and people that I don't know. It has been just amazing, just wonderful.
Well, as I mentioned in the introduction here, one clerk will issue licenses but will resign from being, the town's marriage officer in her particular town. Was that any sort of thing that you could see someone doing? I mean, because this is marriage being, I guess, in a civil context rather than a religious context. I mean, this isn't necessarily, I guess some people could view it as not necessarily a sacrament or something like that we're talking about, but the civil institution of marriage rather than the religious institution.
Well, for one thing, I'm not a marriage officer. Getting back to your original question, was issuing it as a civil matter? No, it's two people cannot get married in New York State unless they're issued a marriage license, which is signed either by the town clerk or the city clerk. A marriage officer or an officiant cannot marry those people unless it's signed, unless the license is signed. And I felt that I could not put my signature on a marriage license unless it was between one man and one woman.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, in your letter to the Granby Town Board and Supervisor, you indicated there that you would be willing to be appointed perhaps deputy town clerk or serve as interim town clerk to assist someone who's new. Would you not have to issue licenses then in that case in any sort of new capacity working for the government there?
I would not be the interim town clerk. I would be possibly the deputy town clerk. And in that case, the person that was appointed to be the town clerk and for the rest of this year would sign the marriage licenses, would write the marriage licenses, and do it by appointment.
Sure. And one last question here from me before we have to wrap things up, Ruth. I know that this is not an easy time for anyone economically speaking. Are you worried about giving up an income here? Is that part of, and of course, that's part of the personal decision that you've had to make in making this decision, but are you worried about making ends meet with this decision just for yourself personally?
God's taken care of me for 65 years. We've been through hard times. My husband was a farmer, and we've been through some very hard times on the farm, and we know how to live on a little. We know how to live with abundance, and we're thankful for the abundant times. Yes, of course, it's a sacrifice, but I know God's going to take care of us, and I'm trusting Him.
All right. Well, Ruth Sheldon, the town clerk there in Granby, New York, we thank you so much for joining us from upstate. We really appreciate your time, and all the best to you in any new endeavors. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for your kindness in having me there.
Well, thank you.
Okay.
We'll stay with us. Are the triple-digit temperatures on the streets of D.C. producing a much-awaited thaw in the big freeze on the debt ceiling limit talks? Well, we'll have that story and the rest of the day's headlines coming up next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Matt McClure. Coming up later, we'll have a closer look at the slap heard round the world. But first, let's have a look at today's headlines. Well, are the state senators who voted to legalize same-sex marriage in New York traitors? Well, that is what the National Organization for Marriage is saying in a mailer going out to constituents of the 4 Republicans and 3 Democrats who flipped their votes on same-sex marriage to a yes. Well, the mailer depicts images of each senator juxtaposed with an image of Benedict Arnold. The organization's president, Brian Brown, says it is the first step in what he called a sustained, determined effort. Well, meanwhile, an inn in Vermont is facing a lawsuit for refusing to host a wedding reception for a same-sex couple from New York. The American Civil Liberties Union filed the suit on behalf of a Brooklyn couple that was told the inn's policy is to not host receptions for same-sex couples. The suit also accuses the inn of turning away 2 other couples. The inn's owners say they are devout Catholics who believe marriage is between a man and a woman. They say they have never refused rooms, dining, or employment to homosexual men and women. Well, an about-face in Illinois, where the state's attorney general has agreed to drop plans to discontinue adoption and foster care cases with Catholic charities. The decision comes after a state judge ruled last week that Illinois could not end its contract with Catholic charities in 3 Illinois dioceses. The state had originally determined that Catholic charities was in violation of a new civil unions law by not granting adoptions and foster care services to same-sex couples and non-married couples. Well, President Obama has officially announced his support for the Respect for Marriage Act. The measure would repeal the Defense of Marriage Act, or DOMA, which defines marriage on the federal level as between a man and a woman. The Respect for Marriage Act also calls for marriage to be defined at the state level. Now, the Senate Judiciary Committee today debated the new measure, hearing from people on both sides of the argument. Well, as leaders in Washington continue to look for a solution to the debt ceiling debacle, the House has overwhelmingly approved the Tea Party-backed Cut, Cap, and Balance bill. The bill would cut more than $100 billion in spending in 2012, cap spending through 2021, and prohibit federal borrowing until Congress approves a balanced budget amendment. It is not expected to pass in the Senate. President Obama has said he would veto it. The president announced the so-called Gang of 6 senators have reached their own agreement to cut $3.7 trillion from the federal budget over the next 10 years. Well, the head of the U.S. Bishops' Pro-Life Committee is speaking out against a panel's recommendation on birth control. The Institute of Medicine yesterday recommended that all insurers be required to cover surgical sterilization and all FDA-approved birth control. Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, though, says that there is an ideology at work in the recommendation that, quote, goes beyond any objective assessment of the health needs of women and children, end quote. There is no word yet on whether the Department of Health and Human Services will implement that recommendation. Well, New York Congressman Peter King has announced his latest hearing on the radicalization of Muslims in the U.S. will take place next week. The July 27th hearing will focus on the Somalia-based terrorist organization Al-Shabaab, which has reportedly recruited Somali Americans in the Midwest. The first hearing looked at Islamic radicalization in general, while the second focused on U.S. prisons. Ireland's Prime Minister is lashing out at the Catholic Church over the clergy sex abuse scandal. During parliamentary debate, Prime Minister Enda Kenny accused the church of dysfunctions, disconnection, and elitism. Kenny's words came after a report last week accused a Catholic diocese in Ireland of dropping the ball on the handling of sex abuse allegations by priests. Well, the Vatican has released some details now on Pope Benedict's state visit to Germany. It will be Benedict's first state visit to his home country since being elected Pope in 2005. During the visit, he'll meet with Chancellor Angela Merkel and former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. From Mexico, the Diocese of Saltillo is responding to protests against its bishop. The bishop was criticized for supporting a forum sponsored by a group that advocates for same-sex marriage and adoption and Social Security benefits for same-sex couples. In a statement, the diocese defended the bishop, saying his actions are not outside the bounds of the gospel. Well, back in this country, Catholic University of America will move ahead with its plans for single-sex residence halls, despite an official complaint against it. According to the complaint, Catholic U is practicing illegal discrimination by eliminating opposite-sex dorms. In a statement to Catholic News Agency, though, the school says it is confident the new policy does not violate any laws. Closer to home, a group of Hindus is suing an Indian restaurant in New Jersey for serving them meat. The group of 16 Hindus says it was told the samosas they were given were vegetarian. Now, the restaurant later admitted that they confused orders and, in fact, served samosas with meat. The Hindus want the restaurant to pay for a trip to India for a cleansing ritual. But the president of the Indo-American Cultural Society says the suit should be dismissed because the group can go to a temple in the U.S. to seek forgiveness. And New York City has posthumously honored the first Hispanic bishop for the Archdiocese of New York. The corner of Fairmount Place and Crotona Parkway in the Bronx has been named in honor of Bishop Francisco Garmendia. The Spanish-born priest was ordained a bishop back in 1977. He served in a number of positions in the Archdiocese, including the Vicar for Spanish Pastoral Development. Well, stay with us. There is more Currents ahead. Coming up, it's an age-old question with newfound relevance. What is marriage? We'll find out.
What society teaches about what marriage is will affect the kinds of choices individual human beings make, and especially the next generation.
Welcome back. Well, what is marriage? As I'm sure you already know, it is quite the timely topic to consider as New York State creeps ever closer to Sunday, July 24th. That's the day the same-sex marriage law goes into effect. And it was a question that was also on the lips and minds of everyone who attended a panel discussion last night hosted by the Archdiocese of New York for young adults. The co-authors of the widely circulated Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy article entitled "What is Marriage?" came together to make the case for traditional marriage and give the folks in attendance there the tools to answer the age-old question in today's modern world.
Questions regarding what marriage truly is have become more pressing than ever. Legislative and court battles and the national marriage culture will hinge on our answers to the questions.
We're engaged in a great debate over the meaning of marriage. It's not just a question of how marriage should be defined. It's not about the definition of a word. It's not about semantics. It's about the fundamental institution of society, the original and best Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, the institution in which we rear our children to be upright, decent, honorable people. And the institution of marriage has taken quite a battering in recent decades. If you look at the divorce rate, if you look at the out-of-wedlock birth rate, the cohabitation rate, you can tell that marriage is in trouble. And of course now the very meaning of the institution is under challenge.
Well, tonight's panelists were all co-authors of an article called "What is Marriage?" that was published in the Harvard Journal of Law and Public Policy. And this article was so popular and so successful and so comprehensive that it really is sort of the pinnacle of all articles on this marriage issue.
Some people think that the main question is equality.
and they make a very quick leap from the principle of equality to the conclusion that same-sex unions should be recognized as marriages. But I don't think it's too hard to see that that just doesn't work. Whatever the right answer is, that won't do. We're all in relationships here that aren't recognized as marriages, and that no one thinks it's a violation of equality not to recognize. People in their private activities can do all kinds of things legally in the U.S., and that's great. The question is what society will teach about what marriage is, and yes, what society teaches about what marriage is will affect the kinds of choices individual human beings make, and especially the next generation.
Those who say that a man and a man are the same thing as a man and a woman are forcing that definition upon other people and forcing the state, forcing its citizens, forcing its institutions to view a man and a man as the same. And people don't want to seem prejudicial or discriminatory, but in fact, I think it's the other side that's forcing their definition of marriage on the rest of society.
It's not a dispute between people of bad will who want to do bad things. It's a dispute among reasonable people of goodwill who see the issue differently.
I hope people will feel inspired, they will feel like they have courage, and like they feel they can speak out, and not only speak out, but really live out the beliefs that they hold towards the good of marriage, either in light of pursuing marriage one day by living wholly integrated, chaste lives in anticipation of marriage, or for those who are married, to realize the beauty, the goodness, and the depth to which they can experience marriage and the witness that they can provide to other married couples and others.
Stay with us. There is more Currents coming up. When we return, Rupert Murdoch's wife wards off an attacker as the billionaire media mogul testifies before Parliament. And finally tonight, media mogul Rupert Murdoch sat in the hot seat yesterday as he took questions from British lawmakers investigating the phone hacking scandal that shut down the News of the World tabloid and is now engulfing his media empire. The billionaire mogul did not have to go it alone, though. He was flanked by his son, James Murdoch, on one side, and his wife, Wendy Deng Murdoch, on the other. And if the senior Murdoch was the day's sort of de facto villain, Mrs. Murdoch emerged as its unexpected heroine. You know, the book of Proverbs says a good wife strengtheneth her arms, and that coincidentally came as an extremely valuable trait for Wendy Deng Murdoch to possess at yesterday's hostile hearing.
Wendy Murdoch was easy to pick out. In pink, when you're 38 years younger than your husband, it's nice to rub his back and pour him water before he testifies. She even restrained him when he pounded the table too much.
Who are proud and great.
But she didn't restrain herself when this happened. An activist pulled a foam-filled plastic pie plate out of a plastic bag. Some of that foam landed on CNN producer Jonathan Wald as the attacker
plunges it squarely into the face of Rupert Murdoch.
And that's when his wife Wendy whacked the guy, even picked up the plate.
Hit him back with it. It was all extremely dramatic.
Sort of reminds us of the woman who used her purse to try to knock the gun out of a hostage taker's hand.
No, Ginger.
At a school board meeting,
this is the weapon.
Apart from shaving cream, all Rupert Murdoch got was a tongue lashing from his attacker.
You're a greedy billionaire.
The activist, who British media identified as Johnny Marbles, had just sent a tweet saying, "It is a far better thing that I do now than I have ever done before. #splat. It may have been more than a close shave for Rupert Murdoch, but at least he avoided major embarrassment by getting his face full off camera. Unlike pie targets like Ann Coulter and Ralph Nader, who managed to throw his pie back at his attacker, Bill Gates got splattered, and then his image got splattered for eternity all over the internet. Anita Bryant got pied by a gay demonstrator.
Well, at least it's a fruit pie.
Huh.
Let's pray for him right now.
First her husband prayed for the attacker, then he went outside and splattered him back. Wendy Murdoch was praised by a member of Parliament.
Your wife has a very good left hook.
Or was it her right? Regardless, a prankster temporarily changed her Wikipedia entry to say Wendy used her ninja background to ward off an attacker. The move is now being referred to as the Crouching Wendy Hidden Dragon. After the attack, Wendy tenderly cleaned off her husband.
Carefully wiping the foam off his jacket and his face. She was smiling and seemed quite happy that she had managed to score a blow.
We watched her crossing her arms and crossing her legs, but it was the right cross. We won't forget.
Nobody tells a story like CNN's Jeannie Mose, and we got that story there from her, of course. And in an update to the story, the lawmakers of the Culture, Media, and Sport Committee, well, they've released a report in light of yesterday's hearing that finds Rupert Murdoch's News International company deliberately tried to block Scotland Yard's criminal investigation into the phone hacking scandal. So this is a story that's not going away anytime soon. Well, that is it for this edition of Currents. Be sure, though, to join us tomorrow as we take a closer look at the slowly shaping Republican presidential candidate field. Until then, though, be sure and visit us online over at currentsny.net. You can go there and watch selected reports and some full broadcasts from the show as well. You can also friend us on Facebook or follow us on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @CurrentsNY. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Matt McClure. Thank you so much for watching tonight. Have a great one.